A new report says it has proof the United States bankrolled Egyptians who wanted Mohamed Morsi deposed as president. Washington insists it isn't taking sides, which has us asking how important is the money spent by the US government for promoting its interests in the Middle East and beyond. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Well, leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt are calling on supporters to join protests across Cairo on Friday. Pro-Morsi supporters are already staging around-the-clock rallies at the Rabaa al-Adawiyya Mosque in the Cairo suburb of Nasser City. Meanwhile, across town, people who support the military coup that deposed Mohamed Morsi say they will hold rallies in Tahrir Square. Well, some anti-Morsi figures are now at the center of a controversial report that accuses them of receiving funding from the United States. The report says that Washington gave money to senior people in Egypt's opposition, many of whom wanted Mohamed Morsi deposed. Among the groups that are said to have funneled millions of dollars to Egyptian activists is the National Endowment for Democracy, a quasi-governmental organization based in Washington. Money from the State Department is said to have been given to opposition members under the guise of democracy assistance. And among those who received funding, a former police officer, Colonel Omar Afifi Soliman, who is said to have plotted violent attacks against Egyptian officials. Well, joining us now from Stanford is Emad Mekay. He works at the investigative reporting program at the University of California, and he is the author of the article about US spending in Egypt. Thank you for being with us. Now, your report, since it was posted on Wednesday, has garnered a lot of reaction. Supporters of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood have seized on this as proof of their belief that outside forces have worked against them from the beginning. Others have criticized it, calling it irresponsible, inaccurate, misleading and disingenuous. Just a few of the words that have been used. Essentially, they're saying you pick out basic facts here and ignore others to support a narrative that says the United States has been funding the effort to oust Morsi from power. Your response?
When we set out to look into the U.S. funding, democracy funding in the Middle East, we were not after policy recommendations. We were just after the money trail. As part of the investigative reporting program, we wanted to know whether the U.S. taxpayers' money were being well spent or not. But what we discovered by looking into dozens of documents is that the U.S. has set up a structure of organization through which they funnel money, and that money trickles down from the U.S. government all the way down to activists who are actually politicians who happen to be members of political parties. And that showed us that it was a violation of not only the Egyptian law, which prohibits political funding, but it's also a violation of the U.S. law, which prohibits giving funding to political politicians overseas. Worse, it turned out that some of the people who received that kind of funding were major advocates of subversive activities on the ground, meaning violence in many cases. And some of the activities they've called for, some of their rallies and some of the events that they gathered led to the death of many people and the injuries of dozens others. So therefore, it's a very straightforward story that we want to see where the taxpayers' money went, and it turned out that
you're suggesting from this article. Sorry to interrupt. You're suggesting from this article that the violence that you're talking about is a direct result of the U.S. funding. That is the inference that a lot of people are making. Isn't that a bit of a stretch?
When the U.S. government gives out money, it should do more vetting both before and after they give those grants and those fundings, and find a way to see whether those involved are involved in bloodshed and in violence. We have not seen evidence that the U.S. has reviewed any of those grants that they gave out after some of those people have been involved in or called for activities that led to violence and led to bloodshed. And again, the first count where this may be illegal, based on lots of people that we've talked to, is that this went to politicians. The U.S. law prohibits the U.S. government from funding foreign politicians. So the way they created it was that to set up an NGO in one country, and that NGO would be receiving U.S. money, but the people who run these NGOs are actually active politicians, members of political parties, and not just in Egypt, but in other countries. I mean, we just focused on Egypt because of what's happening right now and because of the news, but this is a system that the U.S. has created in many other countries in the Middle East and elsewhere.
But when you talk about funding for so-called democratic activities or funding for democracy, when you give money for that purpose, isn't it inevitable that political parties, by their nature, are going to be involved in that somewhere down the line? When you follow this money trail, in fact, the U.S. State Department, or rather the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, which a spokesman that you quote in the same article, says that very same thing: the fine line between political activity and the promotion of democracy is I mean, there is a very fine line there, and it's hard to really define and put the brakes on.
Let me rephrase that. Imagine a U.S. senator or someone in Britain from Parliament who is on the board or who runs an NGO, while at the same time he's getting funding for that NGO from China or from France, for that matter. What would be the public reaction to that story? This is exactly what's happening. It doesn't matter whether this eventually goes through a democratic promotion system. Eventually, some politicians have benefited somehow from foreign government funding, and that's illegal according to the U.S. law.
But again, I go back to the point that was made earlier about the conclusions that are made from this report. And when you talk about the money trail and where the funding is going and how long it's been going on for, all of the papers that you refer to in this report financing a number of secular groups. Yes, some of them were involved in calling for Morsi's ouster, but there were a number of other secular groups there that weren't. This went on in 2011 and before. In other words, Morsi came to power in 2012. So doesn't this put a dent in the basic thrust of your argument that U.S. activity aided efforts to oust Morsi from power? Because that is the sort of headline grabbing line that everyone's taking from this.
Right. I don't have an argument. What I have in my story are facts based on documents, U.S. federal government documents, and these documents show that some of the people who are active over the past year. So it's not as if the story describes what happened over the past few years. It describes what had been happening over the past 2 years, including the time Morsi has been in office, and he's been subjected to unrest and activities that whipped up public anger. What preceded the coup was a wave by some of those politicians who received U.S. funding to whip up public anger against him and create unrest, and that was multiplied by the local media that were owned by very rich folks who mostly derived from the previous regime. So the scenario for the coup was create this anger and get the media to the local media, that is the media they're owned by former Mubarak regime, to help with that, while those activists, so-called activists and politicians, would give a political cover for it. And the grants start in 2011, but they extend way beyond 2011. Many of these are 1 year or 2 year grants. Yes, they may have been signed or authorized in 2011, but they extend way beyond 2011. And like I said, most of the documents we've seen, some of these grants ended in March 2013. That's 3 months ago. So when we mention 2011, it's because that's what the documents state. But it doesn't mean the grant ended in 2011. They may have started 2011, but they may have ended 2013 or 2012 when Morsi was in office.
All right, Emad Mekay, thanks very much for being with us on Inside Story. Well, we've been trying to contact the US State Department for a reaction on this topic, but at this point our efforts have been unsuccessful. Let's bring in our other two guests now in Washington, D.C. Stephen McInerney, Executive Director of the Project on Middle East Democracy, and in Cairo, Hisham Kassem. He's a journalist and publisher. Stephen McInerney, let me start with you first of all. Your reaction to this report. What are the conclusions that you draw from it?
Yes, I think this is an extremely irresponsible, extremely misleading report. I spoke with Emad a few times, I guess, while he was working on this article, most recently just at the beginning of this week. I think, and I'm quoted within this article, I think he ignored a lot of context that he was given by myself and by others that he spoke to in putting this article together. I think his conclusions are rather absurd. Some of the points that you already raised with him, which he sort of declined to respond to. I think he also suggests, he cites numbers in this report. He quotes me as estimating that approximately $25 million was spent, over the past year by the United States to support democracy and governance in Egypt. He implies that these funds are entirely going to the kinds of people that he's writing about, the kinds of organizations that he's writing about. That's false on several levels. First, none of these funds provided by the United States government, either directly or indirectly, are given to individuals. They're given to organizations. But actually, the majority of the funds designated for democracy and governance in Egypt, the majority of the $25 million that he quoted me on, actually goes to the Egyptian government, to Egyptian government ministries to help improve their capacity to improve the ability of local governments to respond to their citizens' demands, to generally improve the capacity of Egyptian government institutions. He declines to mention this. That included ministries controlled by President Morsi and his government and the Muslim Brotherhood. In addition, of course, to this relatively small amount of funds for democracy and governance, the U.S. government provided more than $200 million, annually directly to the Egyptian government, and that's including to the Egyptian government under the control of President Morsi for economic development and bolster the Egyptian economy. They also provide $1.3 billion to the Egyptian military. I think it's absurd to suggest that the United States had some sort of conspiracy to overthrow or to oust President Morsi when the United States government was supporting the government of President Morsi and the Egyptian military with funds that dwarf any small amount used to support democracy and governance.
Hisham Kassem, what's your take on this? Is this something that we should be worried about?
No, certainly not. This is like almost once a year, Emad Mekay comes up with a similar article. He seems to be obsessed with the idea that the United States is financing political activism in Egypt. He never is able to establish the facts. Early in his story, he speaks about documents that were found by the Berkeley journalism program. But he never tells us what those documents are. He failed to answer any of your questions. Every time you asked him a question, he beat around the bush or circumvented and answered on something completely different. Again, he misquotes, quotes people out of context. It happens again and again and again. Mr. Mekay basically claims he has this news agency that's called America in Arabic, which, by checking does not exist. He just sends out emails once in a while with stories like that. He'll send a story in Arabic based on English documents like the WikiLeaks, for example, and full of information that once you read the cable in English does not exist. So I'm really not surprised, same time next year he'll probably be coming up with something different with different names. Again, a lot of the people he mentions have nothing to do with the situation on the ground here. He speaks about a colonel who does YouTube, an Egyptian police colonel in exile in the United States who does YouTube recordings instructing people to go out on the street and carry out acts of violence. Most of the people have never heard of the man. no real existence here.
Well, after the September 11th attacks, the U.S. started to ramp up its funding of so-called democracy promotion. President George Bush set up a number of organizations designed to engage civil society groups and promote good governance in the Middle East. There was also some short-lived diplomatic pressure from the U.S. to hold free elections. In 2005, that resulted in Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood winning a number of seats in parliamentary elections. President Obama tried to draw a line between him and his predecessor. In a speech in Cairo in 2009, he said no system of government should be imposed on one nation by another. But Obama has also been criticized for his reaction to the Arab Spring, which sometimes has looked hesitant and inconsistent. Stephen McInerney, if I could turn back to you on this, it does seem like the United States is trying to strike a fine line here in who it supports in Egypt, and also, just as important perhaps, who it is seen to be supporting.
Sure. Well, in terms of these democracy promotion programs and projects, the United States government's not really trying to support any particular side. These are innocuous programs that are designed to undertake civic education, encourage voter participation, and including capacity building and training for a variety of different types of civil society organizations, for journalists, also for political parties. Now, no funds are directly given to political parties, but there are trainings available for any political parties to participate, and political parties across the spectrum have participated in these programs. In Egypt, these U.S.-funded programs that train political parties on the ability to reach out to voters, to build constituencies, to correctly project their messages, have been participated in, including by the Freedom and Justice Party, the political party of the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the Noor Party, the Salafist Islamist Party, along with a number of secular and liberal parties. So the United States doesn't try to take sides through any of these programs, but simply provide opportunities for a lot of these important institutions of democracy to improve their capacity. A lot of these organizations had no ability to practice in the past before the revolution. Now there's suddenly an opportunity to participate in politics and participate in civil society, and these programs are to help build the capacity of all sides to participate more effectively in democracy.
Hisham Kassem, is it fair to say that both sides use this idea of U.S. support as a way to bolster their argument that outside forces are conspiring against them? I mean, we're hearing this now from the anti-Morsi camp and the Muslim Brotherhood supporters, that there is some sort of U.S.-funded conspiracy in all of this. But we were hearing the same line of argument from the National Salvation Front and for those who wanted Morsi removed from power, that he was getting his support from the United States, and they were the ones who wanted him there. So no matter which side of the fence you're on, it does seem like the United States is always going to be a lightning rod, if you will, in all of this.
Certainly. In fact, the argument right now is coming from the anti-Morsi camp that the United States is supporting Morsi. There's a lot of anger against Ambassador Ann Patterson. Most of it is really unjustified, and evidence presented by this camp that she is supporting Morsi is, again, baseless. And there's not much criticism coming from the Morsi camp, accusing the United States of being against him and supporting the secular front. Emad Mekay is pioneering in that, but I expect that within a few days this might pick up and we hear people accusing the United States of again being anti-Morsi. Again, his argument that the United States financed a few individuals who shaped public opinion in a way that at least 17 million people hit the street is absurd. These would have to be wizards, not regular human beings. And if that was possible, they would have done that earlier in the election campaign, used these same individuals to persuade public opinion not to vote for Morsi.
Stephen McInerney, what should be the relationship between the US and the Muslim Brotherhood anyway?
Well, I don't think there should be much of an official relationship in some sense between the United States and the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization, but there certainly should be a strong relationship between the United States and the Freedom and Justice Party, the political party of the Muslim Brotherhood, as there should be a relationship between the United States and other political parties in Egypt, not a relationship of support, of backing one party over another, but the United States, as an important actor that's involved in Egypt, should engage with parties across the spectrum. Once there are government officials from the Muslim Brotherhood, from the Freedom and Justice Party in government, then the United States naturally will interact with them and have a relationship with them as they do with government officials from any party that are elected, in any country in the world with whom the United States has a bilateral relationship. In addition to that, I think it's important that the United States engage with opposition parties and with parties across the spectrum. But I don't think there should be any taking sides or supporting one party or over another, and I don't think that we've seen that.
Hisham Kassem, is it fair to say that there is something of a media war going on right now in Egypt? It isn't just a battle that is playing out on the streets. It's a battle that's also playing out on the airwaves and online and in the newspapers and everywhere else.
It's true. There was more of a battle before Morsi was ousted from power, because there were several Islamic stations. However, they've been all shut down, and an investigation is going on whether they did broadcast incitement and hate speech. On the other hand, the secular stations are certainly trying to formulate public opinion or fortify public opinion against Morsi. So yes, and again, the state-owned media, which was supporting Morsi prior to his ousting, has now turned against him. Typical, they did that with Mubarak, and they did it with Morsi, and
so
are
the
willing
state media
to do
just
it again and
basically
again.
supports whoever is in power. Is your
the state media? Yes, certainly, yes. But right now there's very little support of the Morsi position.
Stephen McInerney, you want to respond to that?
No, I think I agree with what Hisham just said. I think it's clear that we've seen moves by the Egyptian government and by the military over the past week to shut down some of the media sources that were supportive of Morsi and of the Muslim Brotherhood. I think there's a lot of signs that are alarming in that regard. And certainly it's the case that the Egyptian state media, has always supported the Egyptian government and who's ever in charge at that time.
Hisham Kassem, as I said earlier, there's been a lot of reaction to this article, and indeed one person on Twitter posted that it's only a matter of time before this gets translated into Arabic, and more of Morsi supporters will seize on this. Is there a worry that things like this, rather than promoting more discussion, just incite people's anger more?
No, I don't think it will generate more unrest, more bias, less understanding of Egyptian-American relations, which are fairly opaque, and a lot of the journalism around it is extremely irresponsible. You find stories like this one, which are basically completely unfounded or baseless, and I think it's going to be very important that our media specifically try and handle matters like that responsibly, because the future of Egypt is going to rely on our ability to deal with the rest of the world. And one very important player is definitely the United States. So the sooner there's a better understanding and less of this fraudulent journalism that is basically stirring up the situation, the better for everybody.
Stephen McInerney, final thoughts then. How do you see this playing out then? Is this just a lot of noise about nothing, or is there something more serious going on here?
It is a lot of noise about nothing, in the sense that, as Hisham just said, this article is almost entirely baseless and unfounded. However, it is serious in the sense that to people in Egypt who may be less familiar with these issues, they may take it seriously. And I think it could encourage and reinforce sort of negative misconceptions about the United States. I mean, I think there's plenty of room to accurately be critical of the United States policy in many ways, but the types of programs that Mekay is referring to simply are not represented accurately in his piece.
And on that note, we're going to have to leave it. My thanks to Stephen McInerney and Hisham Kassem. And thank you very much for joining us us on this edition of Inside Story. Remember, if you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.